also in other areas, other areas of Florida, we give some flight training. We do upset training and aerobatic training. And we have a decathlon like Rich does, and also an extra. We start everybody off in the decathlon to make sure that they have the basics, and then move them into the extra if that's what they want. I've been doing flying air shows for about 30 years. I still fly about 12 to 15 shows a year all over the country. And I take aerobatics, and I take my aerobatics very, very seriously, as most of the professional airshow pilots do. And I want everybody to learn this stuff the right way, and hope to pass on what I've learned through having a flight school or an aerobatic school.
Great. Thank you very much, Patty. So I think what I'm going to do is put on my DPE hat just for a moment, because what I think all of us together, as we've talked preparing for the show, realize is that there is sort of a deficiency in aerodynamic knowledge and a little bit in skill, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight. But let's say I was your DPE and you were coming for your private pilot evaluation, and I've done this for about 20 years, so everybody takes their pilot certificate, put it on the table. No pressure here. And in the ACS, we have a lot of different maneuvers, but one of the things they ask for is a knowledge and judgment on spin awareness. So let's say we have a standard Part 23 Cessna, and I got out a brand new one here for you tonight. Never been, I don't think it's even been turned, much less spun. But let's say we're in a 30-degree bank turn, coordinated turn, level turn, is lift, and I want you to go right into that hashtag, loss of control, and you're going to send in some answers, and Russ is going to kind of calibrate this for us. So we're in a 30-degree bank turn. Is lift equal on the wings? Okay, so we have a 30-degree bank turn. Is lift equal on the wings? Second, if I take that plane, and this would be, coming maybe base to final, and I'm slowly deaccelerating, and I don't notice, and I bring it accidentally to a stall, again, coordinated, what's going to happen to the plane? What is going to happen? Is it going to roll, or tell us what it's going to happen? Is one way, the other way, straight down? So give us an answer there. And the last thing I want to ask is, if I wanted to slip the plane from this configuration as I'm turning base to final, or if I'm on final with a wing down, which rudder would I apply? Would I apply the bottom rudder or the top rudder? All three of these questions, by the way, are on the quiz at the end, so we'll give you the answers. You're halfway done with the test. But what I get a lot of as a pilot examiner, unfortunately, is people saying, oh, I can't slip to land because I'm cross-controlled and it's dangerous. Well, slip to land is one of the required maneuvers in the ACS, as are turning stalls. And I get a lot of, oh, my instructor never had me stall the plane in a turn. And so, depending on how evil I feel, we may or may not do that, but you are required to do that on a flight test. So these are things that we might want to talk about. So Rich, why don't you lay out for us this loss of control issue, the problem, and what some of the solutions might be?
Okay, great. So let's start with a relatively simple definition of what loss of control is. And loss of control accidents basically result from situations where the pilot either should have maintained control of the airplane or regained aircraft control, but for some reason did not. And of course, we have two varieties. We have loss of control that might occur during ground operations, and we have loss of control that might occur while we're in flight. And of course, this evening we're focusing on the more fatal ones, which are the loss of control in flight. And it's really not a new issue at all. In fact, we can go back historically 73 years ago to 1944, when the classic book Stick and Rudder was published by Wolfgang Langewiesche. And even in there, Wolfgang talks about almost all fatal accidents were caused by loss of control. And he goes on to add that while the pilots were doing turns. And so, Ethan, if we can pull up the first slide here. Yeah, so we can see almost all fatal accidents are caused by loss of control during a turn, identified 73 years ago. Ethan, if we can go to the next slide now. So the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee released a study that they did where they categorized accidents in the 10-year period, 2001 to 2010. And one of the things they found, again, loss of control in flight, by far and away the largest accident category. In fact, there were more loss of control fatal accidents than the next 5 accident categories combined, which includes controlled flight into terrain, power plant failures, low altitude operations, and then a couple of other categories as well. If we drill down into loss of control and look at the phases of flight where pilots were losing control and having a fatal accident, we find again that maneuvering flight, again, going back 73 years to stick and rudder, still dominates here. So maneuvering flight is the phase of flight where loss of control occurs more often and leads to a fatal accident. Then we have approach to landing, en route, initial climb, and a couple of other different categories. Some additional perspective, if we look at an AOPA study that was done for the period 1993 to 2001, they identified that fatal stall spins by phase of flight, and look, once again, maneuvering flight, far and away the largest category where loss of control accidents were occurring. So this goes back to David's initial questions about turning an airplane and what inputs do we make in the coordinated turn, which way does the airplane brake during a stall if it's coordinated, which rudder do we need to step on if we want to slip the airplane. So additionally, because of all of this, the FAA has made loss of control a special emphasis area, has been for quite a long time. NTSB has weighed in as well. Back in October of 2015, NTSB hosted a forum in DC called Humans and Hardware, where they brought different stakeholders together, and we had a day-long forum looking at perhaps training and technology solutions to try to address the loss of control issue. And of course, there are technology solutions that are on the board. There are also training issues, solutions that are on the board. And it's really going to take both working together to really see a significant change in the loss of control accident rate. Also, NTSB has put loss of control or addressing loss of control as top on their most wanted list. And they have done that for the last several years. We can see it here on the screen, prevent loss of control in flight and general aviation. So it remains topmost as a safety area, an emphasis area, not only for FAA, but NTSB. And then in 2014, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which we'll call ICAO, actually published a manual on upset prevention and recovery training. And this is available online. And what they've done is they've put together an integrated training framework that includes 3 different aspects that ICAO believes would be the most effective for the delivery of upset prevention recovery training, and consequently would have the best impact in reducing fatal loss of control accidents. And their training framework goes from academics through simulation and actually in airplane training. So it's a 3-pronged approach. All 3 steps are important. Along with that, they've come up with a 3-step mitigation and intervention strategy as well, which would make sense to all of us if we just think about it: awareness, prevention, and recovery. If we maintain our awareness, we can prevent the scenarios that might lead to loss of control. If we see a loss of control scenario developing in front of us, maybe we can have a mitigation strategy and intervention and prevent it from going from a loss of control, a departure from controlled flight. And then, of course, the last step is full-blown loss of control. We have to go to the recovery phase. The unfortunate aspect of this is that where most loss of controls accidents occur, we're too close to the ground for the recovery part of it. So if we're relying solely on recovery to the exclusion of our awareness and prevention, it's not a very good strategy. So we need all 3 in this continuum to help us have the best chance of avoiding loss of control in the first place. David, back to you.
Yeah, and that's, I was listening, you were on the finer points that Jason, we have answers coming in. How many? You want to run them? Oh, okay, we'll go to that in a moment. I'm getting noise in my ear. But anyway, you were mentioning that awareness and prevention were much better, Rich, than trying to recover these things at a low altitude. Isn't it like 70% of these are below 1,000 feet, the loss of control accidents? Is that correct?
Well, of course, we have anywhere from 70 to 80% are typically attributed to pilot error. But I can speak really to the stall spin accidents, which are low altitude accidents. More than 90% of accidental stall spins occur below 1,000 feet.
Yeah, so game's over. Ethan, if you could put up the VG diagram I have there. I'm catching them out of order, so it's going to, no, the one with the, that's the one, yeah. So you can see in the center here, this is Dave St. George. The GA pilot uses 11% of the flight envelope. And I'm pretty happy with that. You know, occasionally I'll get a little negative G, a little positive G. When I tweeted this out, you know, and we were talking about unusual attitudes, Patty came back and she said, for the well-trained pilot, there are no unusual attitudes. And I said, now that's my kind of pilot. But we're typically using that small little part of the flight envelope. That's what we're very comfortable with. As soon as we depart from that, we're in stress and we're not going to react correctly unless we're properly trained to automatically take control of that plane. In other words, when a pilot or a person is in stress, immediately their anticipation, their higher functioning executive functions go away. And I could tell you from experience, the brain kind of shrivels to the size of a peanut and you are on automatic. And so unless you are trained to operate there, you're not going to do well. So Patty does training in obviously every corner of that envelope. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how somebody would train for upset recovery, Patty, since you do a lot of that?
We start everybody with basic airmanship and upset recovery techniques. And what we find is that a lot of pilots that come in, GA pilots, don't have some good airmanship skills to begin with. A lot of them do, but some of them don't. They don't exhibit really correct use of the rudder. They're not using rudder in their climb. They're leading turns with rudder, which puts them in a skid right away. Or they're dragging a wing a lot. So we start our first lessons off with basic stalls, steep turns, stalls and turns, and then we do slipping and skidding turns and so on to show them what can happen. Because if you're, first of all, if you're not flying straight and you can't fly, you're flying with the wing down and you're not even aware, but you can't really do aerobatics. So sometimes we spend an hour or more cleaning up their basic flying and getting them to understand how the rudder works before we really go into any serious aerobatics. And what I find is that the pilots want to know. They're disappointed to find out that they weren't taught some of these things and they hadn't done these things. Some of these are commercial pilots. Some have been flying for a long time, sometimes not, but some of them have been flying and have quite a few hundred hours or even a couple thousand hours. But they really weren't taught what the rudder does, what happens in a skidding turn. They've heard about it, and they're upset that they haven't learned that. So it's not being passed on at the beginning stages of flying, and sometimes never. And it's one thing to hear about something, and it's another thing to actually go out and do it and experience it and feel it and be able to apply it in the recovery. So, but again, it's like Rich said, you have to be aware. You have to prevent it, but unless you're aware of it, you can't prevent it or recover from it. So we go pretty deep into that, and so upset training is the first thing that we do. Well,
and you must be always, yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. And I would imagine for somebody as proficient as you, it would be pretty frustrating to see that kind of sloppy flying that happens. But I think the important things you said is it's not just the beginners, it's the very high time pilots that don't handle the rudder correctly.
It can be, yeah. And again, they're as upset about it as, I'm not upset. I'm just glad that they came to us or that they go to any, good instructor. But, sure. But I found that they're quite disappointed and frustrated that they weren't taught these things early on. Of course, we think that everybody should be taught upset training and, more in-depth stalls, skidding and slipping turns and things like that in their primary training, like they used to have to bring forward.
I know. I sent you that World War I or II training booklet, and everyone has to spin and come out on a
like stick and rudder, and it says it all.
Yeah. So. And Rich, when you do your training, it's all in the decathlon then? For the upset training?
Primarily in the decathlon. Yeah, primarily in the decathlon. Yeah. Although there are certain aspects of the training that we can do in non-aerobatic capable airplanes. So we do mix and match. And exactly Patty's experience has been mine and others as well, is that we spend a lot of time just working on basics and deeper understanding of things that we would have hoped that people would have gotten in their primary training. And let's face it, we're all products of our training environment. We don't know what we don't know. And so we're going to talk a little bit later on about the flight instructor side of this whole equation.
Yeah, and we don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I can just relate my experience. When I learned to fly, I went down to the CAP school. This is back in the 80s, and they were down in Poughkeepsie. And I realized right away that I was wasting my money. It's like I didn't know how to fly to start with and use the rudder. And it took me years, and then I got myself a champ, and it's like, and work your skills up. And I went back when they were at Flagler, and it made a lot more sense. But boy, I'll tell you, primary training, and I know this from being an examiner, there's a lot to be learned, and people should come into that business very cautiously and say, I got myself a pilot certificate. This is a license to learn, and now I have to really go out and improve my skills. So what can an ordinary pilot, say they got that certificate and they're marching forward, what would be the first thing they could do to improve their rudder use and skills? Rich? Are there things you can do to build up your...
Sure. So of course it goes back to making sure that there are sound fundamentals. What does the rudder do when you step on it? How does the airplane respond when you deflect the ailerons? What does it do when you apply pitch inputs? And really isolate those three things. And then what we try to do from the aerobatic training environment is bring those movements relative to the pilot. Because really, once we internalize those movements, it doesn't matter what attitude we're in. Yaw always looks like yaw. Roll always looks like roll, and pitch always looks like pitch. So that's one of the things that we can do, is just become more aware of what it is we're doing with the airplane and how is it responding to us. Patty, do you have anything to add to that?
No, and I think in order to be aware of that, sometimes you have to go and get more instruction, but I think a good pilot's always learning. And it doesn't have to be aerobatic instruction. It can just be to find an instructor that helps them understand that. And also reading. There's some amazing magazines out there, Flying Magazine, Plane and Pilot, AOPA Magazine. They always have really good articles on these things. And sometimes I'm surprised at how little some of the pilots that I meet read. I'm like, well, I always have a big stack of magazines at the school and newsletters and anything that I can, put out there. And a lot of them just don't subscribe to aviation magazines. They don't read aviation stuff. And books and so on, and there's so much valuable information out there. You should read as much as you can, because you can learn from that. And that's not the same as being in the cockpit, obviously, but I would say
and that
get
is
all the information you can. Yeah.
And your least expensive. I mean, a good book, and Rich's book, that Emergency Maneuver Training, is that the one you wrote?
Fantastic.
I love that one. So anyway, I think. Okay, there's a question coming on online now.
All right, somebody got brave. Okay, we've got I think Ethan and Will were telling me we have at least one person who attempted to answer that question of yours, Dave. So let's see who that is.
Okay.
Oh, this is a question. Excuse me. Okay, let's see what the question is. All right, I don't have a person's name here, but thanks for asking this. And the question is, what is maneuvering flight? Patty, you want to take a stab at that one? I'll give you a softball.
Okay, yeah, I think I can handle it. Maneuvering flight can actually maneuvering, like making a turn, and a good place where you see maneuvering flight is usually in the traffic pattern, and that's where a lot of loss of control accidents happen, because you are low and you're maneuvering, and this is where the improper use of rudder comes in most clearly, because you're slowing down, you're making a lot of power changes. And so by definition, it's challenging. Does that sound like maneuvering flight to you, Rich?
Exactly. And it's funny how many different words we use to describe exactly the same thing. Maneuvering is just a long way of saying turning flight. And as we know from all attitude flying, there really are only two flight paths that an airplane follows. You're either on a straight line or you're on some kind of curving flight path. And curving flight path is turning / maneuvering flight.
Right.
Okay, well, Todd, I did see your name there. Todd, thanks for that question. Do we have another one, Will? Ethan? We have an answer. Okay, we do have a.
I think they said they had some responses. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what we've got. Dave, I can't read that from here. Can you read that? It's from Robert J. Robert Jankowski. Robert, thank you for thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
He just got his.
It looks like Robert jumps out of planes for a living.
Yeah, he just got his CFI recently, so congratulations to him.
Okay, it says the outside wing in a coordinated turn should be creating more lift in a 30-degree bank coordinated turn, but lift is still perpendicular. Now let's see what the second one says. Ethan said there was a second one coming in. And I'm going to let you take these, Rich, when they actually. Okay, somebody chickened out and deleted it. So, Rich, what do you think about that? If a plane is in a stable coordinated turn, where is lift going to be on these wings? I'll give you the tough question.
The tough question.
We're upright
And there-
too,
there
Patty.
actually-
We're not inverted.
That's right. There are two parts to it. There's the physical act of rolling to that 30 degrees of bank. And the way that's allowed to happen is there is a differential in lift. That's why the airplane is in fact rolling. But once you've established that coordinated bank, there is no more rolling. And so therefore the lift has to be equal on the two wings in the scenario that David has described.
Yeah, what we do in our flight school before people solo is we go out, they've done their normal stalls, we take them, we put them into a turning configuration, and we bring the plane gently to a stall. And they do the same thing every time. They grab the seat and they brace for impact because they think we're going to spin, and it just very gently falls away from the lift vector, which would be there. The lift is equal, so you know, nothing to it. Very easy, very gentle, and it's such a good teaching experience. As a CFI, you can really make an impression on your students that way. And they go, well, what happened? So suddenly you've got them in the palm of your hand. You can talk about aerodynamics and you'll actually be interested. So a turning stall is a very powerful teaching maneuver. Did anyone come online, Russ, and volunteer if the plane was, which way we would slip? We didn't get any.
I think you scared them off.
Okay.
All right. Let's continue on. See where we go. And everybody out
Rich,
there, let's have some comments from you.
Yeah, please jump online and give these guys a little stress. You want to talk about the base to final kind of turning, and since we're into the rudders and use of lift?
Sure. So I want everybody to do a simple thought experiment. I want you to visualize yourself flying a left-hand pattern, and you're turning base to final. So you know an established left-hand turn, coordinated turn, just like David described at the outset here. And I want you to imagine yourself now, Ethan, do we have that next slide? We can put that up. That would be helpful here. So I want you to imagine yourself, for whatever reason, so we're in slow flight automatically already. We've overshot the runway center line. So that's the first link in the chain of events here. And for whatever reason, we feel embarrassed or maybe we don't want to level the wings and do a go around, which is usually the safest option that we have in a case like this. So we just continue. So we go ahead and we decide we're going to skid the turn by applying inside rudder, in this case, left rudder. And as we do that, you can imagine yourselves, as you apply left rudder in a left bank, the nose of the airplane is going to respond by slicing downward in yaw through the horizon. Well, as human beings, if we're 200 feet above the ground and we see the nose dropping, guess what we're going to do instinctively? We're going to try to pull the nose back up, which is not going to fix the yaw problem we created by applying the left rudder. And so now we've got yaw, and we're applying back elevator, which does one thing we know for sure, increases the angle of attack. And if we exceed critical angle of attack with the rudder applied as well, the airplane has no choice but to do an accelerated stall spin too close to the ground for recovery. So no room for recovery, even if we know how, but we had the awareness, breakdown in the awareness, and we did not have a prevention. And this goes back to some of the things that Patty was saying, where people are actually leading their turns with some rudder. We have a training system actually where 1 in 4 pilots, if you survey them, will actually tell you that the primary control that they use for turning an airplane is the rudder. Well, it shouldn't be any surprise then that the stall spin out of a skidded base to final turn or the attempted turn back to the runway after an engine failure is so prevalent if pilots believe, 25% of us, that the rudder is going to make that happen for them. And I know Patty teaches the simulated skidding base to final turn in her training program. Patty, why don't you describe how you set that up and how the students respond to that?
Yeah, that's really interesting too about leading with rudder. We'll have to talk about that some more, because I find that it's often the most experienced pilots that incorrectly use their rudder rather than the least experienced pilots. Because the most experienced pilots are very conscious of using rudder, they're very careful to use rudder, but they overdo it. And when you point it out to them, they have to think about it, and then you discuss it and so on and so forth. But I see it a lot. the base to final turn that we do, and we do that in the first lesson that we give, is first, like David does, and I know you do, like we were talking about, we set up a turning stall. So with the airplane coordinated, make sure that the pilot's square in their seat, and usually I demonstrate it first, and I go into a turn, and I stall the plane. I have a little bit of power on, and when I stall it, I usually just take my hands off. And I'm in the back seat, but I kind of hold my hands on my hands off. It's going straight ahead. It's not trying to do anything. And that often surprises people. They think it's going to go into some wild spin again, that type of thing. We've already discussed on the ground about use of rudder, top rudder, bottom rudder. And so the way I set up a skidding turn, we talk about it, is I pretend that we're in Africa or Alaska, and I make them look out the window. And I say, okay, I'm going to be a sloppy pilot, and I'm going to start putting in some bottom rudder, and I turn, do a nice steep turn, and the next thing we kind of almost often just flip over until we're inverted, and it happens really fast. And I'm flying the plane when I first demonstrate it. People are very surprised at how quickly it happens. They think, and I think anybody would think that, well, I've done stalls. If I get into a stall, I'm going to have some warning. I'm going to hear a stall warning or something like that. When they first see how quickly you can go over, get into a highly unusual attitude, it's a real eye-opening experience. That's how we set it up.
Yeah, and that's going to get their attention for sure. Yeah, I think the other thing that's powerful, though, is when they see that if they are coordinated and they stall, nothing really happens. And I have a question. Yeah.
People are really surprised.
Well, when I do that in a flight test, and a lot of people come in and they say, I haven't done turning stalls. If we go out and we're going to do them, the next thing that happens generally is, nice coordinated turn. They get it into a stall and it starts mushing and it never really breaks. And we're going downhill at 700 feet per minute, nice and stable. And as you know, the ACS says, announces the stall, we're stalled. And there's no awareness, so it can go both ways on that.
Yeah, that's why I demonstrate them at first. They're hard to get into sometimes.
All right, we've got
a question.
We do have a question. Let's see what we've got. All right. W.R. Fence, can you touch on proper and improper use of rudder with banking? Okay, I think it's kind of what we were talking about. Maybe go into it a little bit deeper. Proper versus improper use of rudder with banking. How about it, Patty?
Rich or Patty?
Sure.
Rich, your turn.
Okay, thanks. So the real question is, what is the primary purpose of the rudder? And the primary purpose of the rudder is to cancel yaw. And yaw comes from a lot of different sources. Adverse yaw, deflect the ailerons, we have adverse yaw, we need to cancel that with rudder application. Torque P-factor slipstream, changing throttle settings, changing speeds, high speed flight, there could be some rigging effects. So the rudder is really there to cancel yaw effects. The only times we use the rudder as a primary input would be either to skid spin the airplane, and I always link skid spin together. So either to skid spin or to slip the airplane. And as we know, if we're going to slip the airplane, we're not pointing the rudder at the ground, we're pointing the rudder at the sky. So our job as the pilot, if we're trying to use the rudder as in its primary role to cancel yaw, is to try to figure out how much yaw is left over. So perhaps I'm in a slow flight configuration, climbing left turn. Well, once I'm established there, I'm probably going to guess we are going to need right rudder when we're all is said and done. But if we're in the process of banking in slow flight, it could be less rudder, more rudder. So we're always playing around with trying to find the magic amount of rudder we need to cancel that yaw. And believe it or not, the slip skid ball is not going to give us that information all the time. Patty, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't let them use the ball when we're doing flight training. I usually have something covering it up. I really want them to feel their butt square in the seat, and it's really important. Sometimes people ask me about, how am I going to know? And I'm like, if I'm in the back seat, I will see your head move. I'm going to use your head as the ball. Think about that. And I know that not all planes have as much feel as the type of planes that we train in, but but most of them do. I think even in, a twin like a Baron, you can feel very, very well whether you're square in the seat or not. Light jets, you can feel, the same thing. So, so I want them to feel it. I want them to know and think about which rudder they're saying, okay, now if I'm going left, which rudder do I step on? I'm like, let's try it. Go up and experiment with it, and so on and so forth. But so in a turn, proper use of rudder in a turn is whatever keeps you coordinated, basically, unless you're trying to slip or trying to skid for some reason.
That's great. And I heard twice Patty say the same thing. One was checking when they're just normal flying. Are they square in the seat? You ever notice people are kind of doing this and right away they're not coordinated. They've, and then in the turn, yeah, they're definitely, and I think it's Bud Davison in his talks, when he's talking about flying tailwheel aircraft, he says Novocaine, but, it's just they don't feel it. And so I think a lot of the initial training is tuning up that kinesthetic feeling. And I know, Rich, you do Dutch rolls, right? You call them Dutch rolls still, where you roll on a point. One of your videos has a real nice. Why don't you tell us a little about that as an exercise that people might use? That'd be a good takeaway.
Sure. And to add more about this whole idea of getting pilots to develop their sense of feel, the overwhelming majority of general aviation flying is day VFR, looking outside flying. But yet, when people come into the training system, we're all treated as if we're going to be flying 400 passengers at the flight levels anytime soon. And we cannot, it's almost drilled out of us from the beginning, never trust your senses, sight, sound, or feel. And that doesn't really apply to most of the general aviation flying that happens. Our senses are far more accurate in a visual environment, in a contact environment where we're looking at the ground than any of our instruments. The instruments always have some lag. So I think if we get back, as Patty mentioned, trust your senses when you're in that type of environment. Now, when you're at the flight levels, when you're in the clouds, you can't do that. You have to switch gears and you have to trust what the instruments are telling you. And so the Dutch roll is a good exercise. First of all, we can do the exercise two ways. Put your feet on the floor and just bank the airplane continuously left and right. And you'll see, as you bank left, the nose will move to the right. As you bank right, the nose will move to the left. Feels bad. In some airplanes, you can actually hear the airflow coming off of the prop, and it growls at you. It's got a deeper, throatier sound to it. Put your feet back on and apply left aileron and a little bit of left rudder, right aileron, right rudder, and just continuously rock the wings so that we're not in any steady state condition, and the airplane will stay on its heading, and the nose will stay on the heading. Your body should stay aligned with the airplane. The sound has its normal sense again. The ball is a lagging indicator, so we do it by looking outside. And if the nose stays on a point, we're doing well. The alternative way of doing that is to look out at the wingtip. And as you're looking at the wingtip, it should move in a line from your head to your hip. If it's moving fore and aft or making a figure eight, we know, and you can actually feel it really well looking out at the wingtip as well. We know we're not coordinated, that the rudder's a little bit out of whack or a little out of sync with what we're doing with the aileron. David?
That's excellent. I love doing that exercise. And I'll tell you, I fly different planes. I fly one corporate, and then I fly the Champ. And every time I get into the downwind, I just do that to kind of tune up the feet again. And so I can feel that different plane that I'm in. Otherwise, it's going to be a really lousy landing. Patty?
Can I say something? So one thing that Rich said that was great was you can't fly by feel and your senses. You can't rely on that when you're flying IFR and you're flying a heavier plane or any plane when you're flying IFR. You have to go by instrument. A good instrument pilot, though, can do both. And we also get a lot of, pilots that are used to, Cirrus pilots, people like that fly a lot of instruments, and they have a hard time switching to the airmanship, sticking rudder mode, feeling and seeing, looking outside and looking where they're going. They're always going straight ahead instead of looking where they're turning. Is something that we see a lot. If you think of pilots like Sully, and you think of the Gimli glider, the 757 that slipped down into Gimli and landed because they miscalculated the fuel and they flamed out, and incidents like that where airliners have been saved from disaster, those pilots had the ability to switch. They had good stick and rudder skills, and they had the ability to switch from all instruments to flying the airplane. So no matter how good your autopilot is, no matter how good an instrument pilot you are, you need those skills to be a good aviator.
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I love that stuff. I mean, ultimately, it's going to come down to controlling the plane. You break out of an ILS and you got a wicked crosswind, you got to get the rudder in here, you got to get right on it and put it on the pavement. Ethan says we have a question. Loss of control. Are most loss of control accidents weather related? And I think that's a Rich Stoll question, if I ever heard one. Are most loss of control accidents weather related?
Yeah, certainly weather is a large factor in all kinds of different types of accidents. But if we think back to the AOPA study that looked at the period where 41% of the maneuvering flight accidents culminated in a stall spin, and the classic base to final, or the classic engine failure on takeoff with a turn back, those are all visual type accidents. So weather might drive a lot of the poor decisions that pilots make. And once we get into the clouds, mismanaging the maneuver, the turn that might get us to better weather, certainly is a large part of loss of control. But I think primarily what we want to talk about today are the day VFR, looking outside, where most of the accidents are occurring, and what can we do to avoid those types of accidents.
Great. And I'm going to jump Ethan here. He's going to hate me for this, but do you have that slide that has the 5 bubbles on it from the loss of command precedes loss of control? Yeah, I think this is a really good sort of analysis. This is an AOPA tape that's very good. And it's mostly talking about how the stalls we practice during training don't equal the stalls we, get a startle response in. It's not the same thing in the pattern, but it also points out, if you put the slide back up, I'm sorry. Discipline, precision, awareness, then comes loss of command, and then finally loss of control. In other words, it's a continuum, and failure to prepare, failure to stay out of the weather, perhaps, failure to accommodate the terrain. You've dug yourself a pretty deep hole, and then something happens and you lose control. And I don't know, we're going to get into the CFI thing. I think I want to play that Thunderbird tape, Ethan, if you could. We'll just run that quick. This was an accident that happened in 2003.
I think 153, okay. 2 clear, 4. Smoke gun ready now. Smoke gun ready now. Left turn. Continuous left. Fire up. 685, 3, middle, more pull. Deep 4. Pull's okay after 1. 1 left turn.
Knock it off. Thunderbirds, knock it off.
Get there. Go route.
Thunderbirds, knock it off.
Go route.
Okay, bad day for taxpayers. $20 million jet got put in the ground. No one died. He did punch out. But I hope everyone could see that was a fairly capable aircraft, F-16 with 30,000 pounds of thrust. And I play this in a lot of my seminars just because I want to ask people. And I'm asking you now, I'm going to still get some of this feedback going yet. So Twitter, you can use loss of control and just tell us what happened to that airplane. Why was he crashing an F-16? What occurred there? Loss of control. See if we can get that. But as he came down and he's trying to make that corner, the plane was actually still descending as he's coming down. And if I could eliminate one thing in flight training, I think it would be the term stall speed, because I think everyone gets confused with this thing, stall speed. Have any words of wisdom on that for us, Rich, Patty? You guys deal with that all the time. Stall speed is never
Absolutely.
one place, right? Yeah, tell us, Patty.
You talk about that. I really enjoy covering the airspeed indicator up and not giving. If I start a student off in a decathlon, I don't let them have an airspeed indicator for the first maybe 3 hours, and then I'll let them have the airspeed indicator. And we do all the stalls. Some of the students are like, "How am I going to fly without that? I've never done that." I'm like, "Well, we'll just they forget about it pretty quickly." But I totally try and get away from the idea of stall speed. and unless they ask for the POH of the airplane ahead of time, I don't even send it to them. I don't want them to think about it. So, that's a really good point. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, one of the most common questions I get, and probably you too as well, Patty, when people come in, is they've not flown a decathlon or an extra before. And one of the first questions out of their mouths are, what's the stall speed? And I'll throw a question right back at them. And I say, I don't know, you tell me. And that opens up the discussion, because theoretically pilots understand or have been taught in that theoretical sense that any attitude, any speed, but yet their practical experience is in one attitude at maybe 1 or 2 speeds. And so is it any wonder that that's what they correlate it to? And then it's not until they come and see someone like you or like me where they get to see any attitude, any speed for real.
Yeah, it's so true. And do you pull the stall warning like we do? You don't want that going off all the time, I'm sure. So they don't ever get a stall warning, and they forget about it after the first flight. In fact, most people don't even ask about it.
Patty's plane is totally MEL. There's no airspeed. There's no ball. There's no stall.
No stall warning.
You
are going to feel that plane. Yeah, they're working. Okay. So I think what we want to probably do is, Rich, you wanted to talk a little about the flight instructor, and obviously we don't want to throw flight instructors under the bus since we all are flight instructors, but.
We do have a question.
Oh, Ethan said a question coming in.
Okay, we've got another one. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate you chiming in. Says, Rich, please expand on how the ball doesn't always indicate whether you're coordinated. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. So I'm curious. Tell us more about that.
Excellent. I'm glad the question was asked. If you think about it, the ball is an instrument like all other instruments. And one of the things we learn about instruments is they all suffer from one 3-letter word called lag. When we're in the process of dynamically maneuvering the airplane, all of our instruments, including the ball, will have lag. The Dutch roll is a perfect example. You can't do a Dutch roll and stay coordinated by staring at the ball. If you tried it, everyone in the airplane would be sick in a matter of seconds. So there's one indication. I want you also imagine picturing the slip skid ball in your airplane, that curved glass inclinometer. Put it upside down. Where does the ball go? So it's also bank limited. You exceed a certain bank angle, doesn't work either. And the third one, probably the most important one, is the closer you get to spin entry, the less reliable the ball is. In all of the spins approved airplanes I've ever done a simulated skidding base to final turn in, I can always initiate spin entry with the ball on the line, half in and half out. And let's face it, most of us fly a half a ball out all the time anyway.
Okay.
This is true.
I hear
Yes,
people
Ross?
are flooding us with questions, but we are not ready yet. So keep them coming.
Are they?
I'm talking to him in here. We got your questions. We want to get to them. So we'll continue our discussion and we'll try to get you in there. Thanks.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little about the spin endorsement that people get in the CFI preparation, Rich? I know that's
Sure.
a topic you're passionate on.
Yeah, so of course, all of us are the product, as we said earlier, the product of our flight training. And then hopefully by interacting with other pilots or other instructors and reading materials and listening to pilots talk, we can improve our knowledge and our skills base. And of course, there's a difference. Flying is a funny sort of thing because we allow people who want to have a different career other than flight instructing to park themselves in the flight instructor community to build time for another career. And this is not to say that there aren't people who want to aspire to become an airline pilot who are not excellent teachers. I'm not talking about them. But there is a difference between people who enjoy teaching and who want to give back to aviation and time builders. And time builders are really the people who are in our community who are not interested at all in teaching and actually do a disservice to aviation. And unfortunately, there's lots of poor flight training going on out there. Patty sees it on a regular basis. I see it, other people who provide the training we do as well. We've already talked about we have to spend a lot of time just going back to the basics with a lot of people before we can progress them in the training that we really want to get them to. And one area is the spin endorsement. And all flight instructor applicants are required to get a spin endorsement that says they are competent to teach and they have instructional knowledge in spins. Yet, on average, flight instructors receive an hour or less of ground instruction on stall spin dynamics, and perhaps as few as 2 spin entries. And usually one of those spin entries is done to them. But yet they're signed off as if they're competent to teach it. If all it took was 2 landings to be competent to teach landings, we'd be soloing students after 2 landings. So we can see that that's kind of an absurd thing. When it comes to upset prevention and recovery training, there's actually some discussion going on that there should be an upset prevention and recovery training endorsement for flight instructors modeled on the spin endorsement one. And if we do that, it would be not only ineffective and counterproductive for upset prevention and recovery training, but disastrous at worst. Patty, do you have any thoughts on kind of the firebomb I just threw out there?
No, we get calls from CFIs who are scrambling to get their spin endorsement so they can get their CFI, and they ask how long it'll take, and we say, well, we don't know, how long it'll take. We have to see how you fly and how, proficient you are, and some people get, nauseated the first flight, and are we going to get you through that, so on and so forth. And they're like, well, and I have the feeling that they shop around until they find somebody that can give it to them in an hour sometimes. Sometimes they're very good, and you can get them done in an hour or so, or hour and a half, but we'll say, well, it could take you 2 flights, could take you 3. We don't know. And it's, I don't think it's taken very seriously, like you said. I think it's considered just sort of a sign off, unfortunately. And
I'd like to take it even a step further and say, okay, every flight instructor not only needs a spin endorsement, a real spin endorsement, but they need upset recovery training. What if we did that? How much upset recovery training would you, what is a good amount to get an inoculation so that you're safe? What do you see as a reasonable amount?
5 hours. I think 5 hours is a really good basic amount of time where you can get your spins done. You can feel fairly comfortable with spins. You can do all your stalls, and feel comfortable with upset recovery in about 5 hours, I think. And a lot of times when people come and do 5 hours with us, we'll say, do you have your spin endorsement? Are you getting your CFI? Let us sign you off, or let us, we'll offer it after they
Do it
become
at the same
competent.
time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I see. But the school, these people are just shelling out a lot of money for their flight training. The schools that send them, or the schools where they're getting their CFI, often are accelerated. Not that that's bad, but they don't have a lot of extra money to spend. The schools aren't taking it necessarily seriously. They're like, oh, just go get your sign off. And it's kind of a mill, that they're putting people. I don't think it's taken seriously at all.
Rich, do you
really
think, what do you find, 3 to 5 hours works for upset recovery?
Yeah, I agree with Patty. 5 to 6 hours. The emergency maneuver training program has 2 modules. Each one is 3 hours of ground, 3 hours of flying. Module 1 is stall spin awareness, ends up anywhere on the order, pretty close to 20 to 24 different types of spin entry and recoveries, and they'll learn their spin endorsement. And then the second module, that second 3 hours, is all the roll upset recoveries. We do simulated loss of control failure scenarios and things like that. We have people land using the trim only, which is fun to do in the decathlon. Most people have never done that before. So yeah, 5 to 6 hours of, and we're talking about, I'm sure the same is true with Patty's program. This is highly intensive training. And you're going to come out after 5 or 6 hours as if you had 100 hours of training and 100 hours more of experience than you had when you started.
Absolutely.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, you have 2 very qualified people to do that training, and obviously you'd come out of it a much safer pilot. One thing I want to mention that everyone can do for themselves, because we want to give you takeaways tonight. The course, and I think, Ethan, you have a slide on it from AOPA, Essential Aerodynamics. Rich speaks highly about preparation, and Patty says how much reading helps you. This course, and it's Wayne Phillips, ironically, who taught me in Colorado in 737s. Wayne Phillips is a wonderful instructor. There's no Greek letters, but I used to teach a course in aerodynamics, and they do it so much better because they have the video to do it. It's a wonderful course. It's in the resources when the end of the course comes and you take the quiz. Even if you don't take the quiz, down the bottom is all the resources. So look for that course there. Rich has also provided a lot of resources in the bottom of the quiz there, a couple of papers. So where do we want to go from here? Rich, you want to tell us a little about your Learn to Turn initiative and community aviation? Oh, they said we have a question coming in. We'll go with that.
Okay, thanks for keeping them coming. Let's see what we have here. All right, Anthony Benjamin, thanks. How do I find a good place near me to get upset and recovery training? Well, if you're in Idaho, you could go to Rich, and if you're in Florida, you could go to Patty. But there are a lot of other ones, Alabama, and so what are some of the ones that you guys would suggest around the country if you feel so inclined?
I
Rich?
tell people to go to IAC. I'm sorry, did I step on you?
No,
I
go
tell
ahead,
people to go
Patty.
to
No.
International Aerobatic Club is IAC, and they have a really good directory of aerobatic schools, but any aerobatic school can teach upset. Well, most aerobatic schools, I think, have upset training courses or incorporated into their courses, the good ones. So that's where I send people if they're unable to, to travel or there's nobody close to them. And we can always recommend people too.
That does also bring up, a topic I think we were going to touch on anyway, the difference between acro training and upset training. I've had a 2-day upset training course, so I know the difference, but a lot of people don't. I see this online all the time. How should I get my upset training? Well, go take an aerobatics course. I know Patty and Rich, you don't agree with this, and I don't either. What do you think?
I used to agree. I used to disagree with it as well. I used to feel that, and I still feel, if you know how to do aerobatics, there are no unusual attitudes, and it's all incorporated into a good aerobatic course. But upset training and aerobatics is really quite good. So I became a convert of it, and we have a totally separate upset training course than we do a aerobatic course as well. And I know Rich will get a lot more into it than that. But basically, an upset is something that happens to you and that you're not prepared for, that you have to recover from, whereas aerobatics, something unexpected. Whereas aerobatics.
Okay. And Rich, I know you're a master aerobatic instructor, so that master certification is also used for aerobatic instructors, right?
Yes, there is a separate focus. If you do most of your training either spin related, upset recovery, training related, or aerobatic related, you can qualify every 2 years to renew that designation. It's voluntary.
I see. So are we good to go here, Russ? We got more people flooding in, or should we proceed with the syllabus here a little bit?
Okay, go
Okay,
ahead.
Ethan says
go ahead,
go.
David.
The man on the board. I just want to make sure that we summarize what we've kind of talked about so far so that people have a real solid takeaway. And have we missed any items that you wanted to cover, Rich? I know you had the Learn to Turn part.
I think we're doing just fine. We're doing just fine.
Okay. So what I heard from you guys, we talked about turning stalls. We talked about not trusting the ball, kind of calming that inner engineer that wants to look at all the instruments and looking outside, feeling the plane, right? Slip and skid. I always thought that glider training was an excellent way of getting a feel for the plane. I think that's where I learned a lot of my chops as far as controlling was. You get in a glider, if you're not doing it correctly, you're not going to get any lift because you're spoiling all the lift by being one way or the other. And you've got those ailerons way out there. So I like glider training as a tonic. Dutch rolls are a very good way. And all of these are predicated upon finding a good instructor. How do you find a good instructor? Any clues for that, Patty, Rich? How do you know when you got a good one?
I'll take a stab at it. So one of the resources I think that you have online available to everybody is a document that I wrote on how to shop for upset prevention and aerobatic training. But basically, you want to interview people, talk to them. You are in charge. You are the buyer, and ask questions. Ask hard questions. Ask to see a syllabus. How are they going to progress you through there? What are the concerns you might have? Do the techniques that you're learning, can you apply those in an emergency in the airplane that you normally fly? So as Patty mentioned, she has a separate upset recovery training course, but that really is the dovetail. If people want to come out of a Cessna 172 or a Cirrus and take her course and go back to those airplanes, all those techniques and the lessons learned do apply. If they would want to then go on to aerobatics, well, guess what? They've already done all the things that can go wrong. Now it's focusing on doing the maneuvers correctly.
Right.
Well, and I think I want to emphasize what Patty said, which is all of that maneuvering of the airplane, control of the airplane is going to apply all the way up through turbines and airliners. What was it, the Air France? Was it a stall right from the flight levels into the ocean? We've seen that all the way up through the big airframes where they don't understand what's going on. So it's partly knowledge. It's partly, just being able to control the plane when the magic checks out. So
no, I think it's important for people to understand that all of this training is transferable to anything that you fly, just like you said. I think sometimes people that fly heavy planes don't think that what we do in small planes is necessarily for them, but it's all transferable. It's all basic aerodynamics.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I agree 100%. So what we want to do is, if people are out there, does anyone want a Zulu headset? Should I take it home tonight? I'm having a real hard time deciding this, but Lightspeed's been great enough to donate a Zulu 3 headset. We have it here ready to ship, and one of you is going to be the lucky winner. So if you have registered for FAA Wings tonight and you're on the list, there's a phone number to call, and I think Ethan has a slide for that also. It's 901-687-5217. We're going to take the 10th caller for that. The 10th caller will get the Zulu headsets. We have some other prizes for the 9th caller. Rich, do you have the book? You're going to donate a book too, right? And some CDs?
Yes.
I think that book, you're very humble about recommending it, but it's one of the best books I've ever read on just basic aerodynamics, the emergency maneuver book. So we'll have all those. A couple of things while we're waiting for the calls to come through. If you would put up again, let's see, what do we got here, Ethan? The CFI toolkit. I'll just sell some free items, which is to say I'm a DPE, and one of the most disappointing things I get when I go to a flight test is someone's not correctly endorsed for that test. So I wrote this app. It's available on the Android or on Apple. And it's got all the endorsements. It's got all of the requirements for all the certificates. And it also has now put the codes for the flight tests. If someone's got erroneous items that you need to endorse, that's also on this. So it's Safe CFI Toolkit. You can go to savvycfi.com. There'll be an emulator. You can try it out, or you can just download it. It's free. And really all we're trying to do is increase the professionalism of the CFI. So whether you're a member of SAFE or not, go get it, use it, let me know how you like it, and we'll improve it. Let's see what else we have here. Good ideas from you guys. Last words for our audience that are going to go out there and fly their planes now in turning stalls. What should we not do, right? Yes, Rich.
I'll throw one thing in that, and Patty probably gets questions like this too, but a lot of times people will come in and they say, well, I want to take this training in case the airplane enters a spin. And so some of what we have to do is, as a psychologist, is kind of change mindsets a little bit. The airplane didn't do this to you. Flying is not something that happens to the pilot, it happens because of the pilot. And one of the things upset training and expanding your envelope to meet the airplane's envelope really shows you is that your actions have performance consequences. So one of the things that you want to take away from this, hopefully, is aside from signing up for some training, is learn to relax and allow yourself to experience different things, flying related, and see what happens. If you do this, the airplane is going to do that. And so it's not a battle between you and the airplane. It's you working with the airplane. And so just learn to relax. You know more than you think you know. That's why when you cover up an airspeed indicator or slip skid ball, yeah, they're nervous initially, but they actually know a little bit more than they think they know. So take some credit for that.
That's wonderful advice.
Okay, I believe we have another question. I think we have a Okay. Go ahead, Dave. We'll get back to it in a second. Continue.
No, I was going to say, I think that all of those points are very important, which is, really trusting yourself in the plane and building that confidence. And a good CFI is all about doing that, is building competence and confidence in the student. I think it's important to know what your limitations are too, and we could talk a long time about, knowing your limitations, having a margin, and then not pushing it too close to the edge. Because obviously, somebody like Patty, I don't think is ever going to get herself involved in an unusual attitude recovery.
I've scared myself in the past. I've done, we all go through period, we all push it a little hard sometimes, and you learn from it.
Well, yeah, when you're inverted 12 feet over the runway, I'd say that's a critical situation.
That's when you can't mess up. It's other times, getting too slow in a climb out and, surprising yourself.
Right.
And
Yeah.
all of it.
Okay, while we're waiting for these phone calls to come in to win the headset from Lightspeed Aviation, as well as the CDs and books, we're going to try to grab another question or two. Let's see what this first one is here. Dominique Purpura, thanks. In an upset training course like Patty offers, can you use your own airplane, for example, a 182? I ask because I want to know how to recover in my own aircraft. Okay, there you have it.
No, I would say no, because we're going to put you in upsets that are much more extreme than you'd want to put your 182. However, the training is transferable so that what you learn with us, you can take back to the 182 if you need to. For example, when we do the skidding turn, and we get into a very, serious upset, let's say like you're inverted, you don't want to do that in your 182. The 182 is not really stressed for it. But if you get in trouble and you get somewhere in that regime, you'll be able to recover from it. So in that sense, it's transferable. Does that help?
Does for me. I wouldn't want to take the 182 and start.
Beat our decathlon set.
Right.
What do you think?
I'm going to just jump on one quick question that I asked that we wanted to get the answer to. And, I would also encourage your CFI, if they're good and they're been approved by Rich Stoll, to maybe try that turning stall with a little bit of a skid. And so one of the questions was, which rudder are we going to add to skid? Because I had a CFI candidate give me a skid to landing instead of a slip to landing. So if, as Rich said, you want to step on the sky or keep the nose out of the turn, and then you've got yourself a fairly stable aerodynamic configuration called a slip. And if you stall it in a full slip, if it's a Part 23 plane, and I would say at a nice, safe altitude, you're going to discover that nothing at all happens. We take all our students on lesson 7 after they do their turning stall, and we do a full slip, bring it to a stall, and the plane just sits there and kind of vibrates and starts going down at about 800 feet a minute. And most people, again, are grabbing the seat. They're sure it's going to spin, but it's not a pro-spin kind of input, provided your power is at idle. And that's a very important thing, because if you add the power, suddenly that's going to accelerate the air over the tail, and it's going to make that rudder much more effective and take it over the top. So try to make sure you know what a slip is. So when you say, I'm going to slip to land, you're doing the correct thing. Did I get that right, Rich?
Dave, yeah, one caveat on there, David. So, for example,
Yes,
you can take, Patty can go out and do a stall in the slip in her decathlon, and it'll bob in and out of stall buffet, but it'll stay in the slip on track. If you do some of the stalls you're describing there in other high-wing airplanes like Cessna 172, it won't spin, but it'll start a kind of a slipping, stalling, bobbing spiral, spiraling descent. It's the low-wing airplane that can be particularly problematic, and it doesn't matter whether it's an A36 Bonanza or the Cirrus or even the Extra 300. Those airplanes at the stall will tend to roll over the top toward a spin departure. But typically, if you're on top of things, you can just stop it by pushing forward on the elevator, moving your feet back to neutral, and just catch it back in level flight. So it really does kind of depend on the geometry of the airplane. The low-wing airplane tends to be the one where you have a greater propensity to go over the top at the stall in a slip.
Yeah, I know my Champ has enough rudder. It'll take it right over the top too. But your Piper PA-28 sort of just sits there. And it's always amazing when, as an examiner, somebody's going to do the power on stall and they pull it up to the moon. The first time I saw this, and I'm like, I can't wait to see what happens. And the thing just unloads and falls like a puppy dog and nothing happens. I'm like, darn, really wanted to see that happen. Apparently, we're having some problem with the, either people don't want the headset. We're up to caller number 8. So if you want to jump in there and grab yourself a headset, I think that Jenny says, I have an 8th, but nothing since. So if you people are still on board, there's still a chance to win a Zulu 3 Lightspeed headset. Wonderful piece of technology. Or if the phone's not working, I'm not sure which. Is anyone out there having a problem getting through?
All right, well, while we wait for for that winning call to come in, here's another question. All right, Mike Holliday. Hi, Mike. Can you take a minute to talk about the Air France plane that stalled at Florida all the way down? I believe this was last year. How did they not get out of the stall? And that is the question. Who wants that one? This is
Familiar with that one, Rich, Patty?
Yeah, there was an excellent article written in Vanity Fair by Wolfgang Languish's son, William. And it was really, really good, and it went into great detail about exactly what happened. And what he researched and what he discovered from the accident report was they stalled the plane about 95 times. I think maybe it was 92 times, something like that. So no, they didn't realize what was happening. They obviously hadn't had the right training, and they kept pulling back on the stick, hoping that they were like, why does it keep going down when I'm pulling back? Was what one of the co-pilots said. Apparently one of an off-duty FO got in the left seat, which was empty at the time for some reason, and tried to push the stick forward because he realized what was happening because of the way the Airbus is configured. The pilot in the right seat, it didn't let him because the other guy was pulling back. So it's just a conundrum, it's a mystery as to why they didn't understand that. Apparently, the testing showed that they could have recovered as low as 10,000 feet by pushing the stick forward, getting the nose down, changing the angle of attack. So it's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed, and that's one of the problems. That's why loss of control is such a big problem today, and why it's the #1 cause of accidents.
I know there was another one, wasn't there, in a CRJ where two young guys took it up. No one else was on board. They got to 41,000 because it was the 410 club, and they stalled it, and they took it all the way into the ground with never recovered it also. Just a lack of understanding, angle of attack, get that nose down and make it fly. What I'm hearing from Jenny on the other side is that the phone lines are jammed. So you guys are doing a great job. You've
Good.
Totally.
Or they're really mad at us.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what we could do. Russ, do you think if we had everyone email, or what's the fallback position here?
Are you going to throw me under the bus, huh?
Yeah. Call Rich's phone in Idaho.
That's right. Call Rich and have him choose. Well, we have, we're up to caller 8, and now the calls aren't getting through because the lines are locked up.
That's what Jenny's saying. It said phone lines overloaded.
Oh, wow.
They can also text that number, she said. So if you want to try texting that number.
Text the number.
So
Let's give it a try. I know people don't want to stay up all night trying to do this. See if you can get a text.
But there's an incentive.
That's right. There is an incentive. Let's give them a couple of more minutes and see if a call or a text can come through, and because it's a wonderful prize. I mean, I wouldn't mind fighting you guys for it, but
right.
we have to give it away to a deserving viewer.
One more thing I want to just talk to Patty and Rich about, and when Rich said, and it was a great word, the rudder is used to cancel yaw. I'm sure you've both seen this as experienced flight instructors, and you too, Russ. You're rolling down the runway, right? We're ready to take off. As soon as the plane lifts off, it's got that, yaw to the left. And what's the first input the pilot throws in there? Right aileron.
Aileron.
Yeah. Isn't that and right away. I mean, as a CFI, right away what's going on. They're not using the feet. And so suddenly we're climbing in a a slip there, and then they might add some right rudder, and they will never add left aileron and get the ball centered. In a 152, we have a lot of 152s in the club, and if you don't get that thing tuned up, as Rod Machado says, a 152 only climbs because the earth curves. It just won't climb in the summer, especially. So, try to look at your flying as a pilot and just really be sensitive to what's going on and think about what control you're using, because a lot of time in the climb, people are holding ailerons when they should be holding rudder in there. And if you really pay attention, I think you're going to be a better pilot. If your CFI is not paying attention, they probably just had too many hours that day.
Well, right rudder is the
plane,
most famous comment every CFI makes in his teaching career. Right rudder,
this
right
is
rudder.
true, right?
And
The mating call of the CFI, more
Yeah.
right rudder.
Students in regular general aviation aircraft understand that the left turning tendency caused by torque and maybe slipstream, but they don't understand P factor. And when that nose comes up, they don't understand how the P factor gets added into it, even exacerbating the issue. So more right rudder. We've all said it a lot of times.
We do have a winner apparently finally, and she's
All right.
correlating that against the list. So I'm sorry for the delay, everyone, and really appreciate you two guys showing up for us tonight, spending time. Both of your input, very valuable. And for me as a flight instructor, it corroborates a lot of what I do. When I hear Patty say she covers up the airspeed, I'm like, I'm not alone. And if it's a G1000, it takes a whole towel to make them fly the plane, Because really, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the technology that we've put into planes is a huge distraction from flying well VFR. I mean, it's wonderful information that's feeding all kinds of information into you, but not for a lot of the VFR stuff that we're doing. Eyeballs outside, feel that plane, and as you roll, watch the nose. You'll know if you have enough rudder.
Okay.
You
Well,
must get a lot of Go ahead.
I was going to
Russ.
say, we're running
Sorry.
a little bit short on time here. Shall we let Jenny just get in touch with the winners? Rather
I think
than,
that probably is going to be best.
yeah, because I
let's
don't think
wrap
people
it
want
up
to
then.
sit here all night
So,
waiting
all
for
of-
the...
Right. Yeah. All of you that want Master Wings credit, we do have the on the page. Is that loaded up now on the launching page on the online Ground School Live? Okay. Ethan says it's there. So the page that you logged in on, there's also now a tab populated. If you click that, it will take you to the quiz.
No,
At the bottom of that quiz are all the resources also. No?
that's not on the page.
Not there yet?
Didn't know about it.
Okay.
Okay, that will be on the page within the next 30 minutes after we get off. That link will be on the page. The link that's on the page now is just to the Fast Team Spans page. For the
Well, I can give
webinar.
it to everyone quick. It's a bit.ly link, so it's bit.ly/LOC-live with a capital L.
Say
So
it again.
LOC is capitalized. So bit.ly/loss of control, LOC, all in caps, -live with a capital L. And they will populate it on the website so that it'll take you to the quiz. Now, what the quiz allows you to do is correct your answers. So please correct it to 100%. Please use your FAA registered email, because everyone has 5 emails, but it has to be the one that you're registered with so that you get credit. And it's probably going to take us about 3 to 4 days. So it'll be into next week before we can bulk upload all this, and you will get your Master Wings credit. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us and your patience. And sorry about the phone lines. Somebody will get a text or an email, and you will be the winner of the new Zulu headsets. So
Absolutely.
enjoy the snow up there in Idaho, Rich. We're getting the same thing here in Ithaca. And Patty, you can enjoy the sunshine in St. Augustine, right?
Oh, it's freezing. It got down to 60 today.
60. Oh! Any last
Okay.
words, Russ?
Yeah, I would just say, Dave, this is number 3 in the can. This webinar series is doing well. As you and I have talked about, we've got another one that we hope to be putting together next month. So for everybody watching, please watch the page, goldsealgroundschool.com/live. And you can also catch us on our Facebook page where we announce these things too. Patty and Rich, of course, it's great to see you again, and thanks for joining us tonight. Patty, give our best to Buddha. And
I should have had him sitting on my shoulder.
you should have. So Will and Ethan back in the control booth. That's Will Flash Gordon and Ethan Iceberg. Thanks, guys, for doing such a great job. And we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. So good flying.
Have a good night. Thank you.
This webinar was brought to you by SAFE, the Society of Aviation and Flight Educators, and by the Gold Seal Online Ground School, where instructors join for free and monitor their students' progress. Learn more at onlinegroundschool.com.